This is the ampulla. This is the infundibulum. Infundibulum has fimbria. Okay, and I told you this is a broad ligament. And this the portion of broad ligament between which is immediately below the fallopian tube, you call it as mesosalpinx, and which is adjacent to the ovary, it is called as mesovarium. Mesosalpinx and mesovarium. Okay, so one question that they'll ask you in the anatomy is, what are the corneal structures that are cut during hysterectomy? Okay, so if it is going to be an abdominal hysterectomy, the first clamp that they are going to put is in the cornua. And the cornua is going to contain these three structures, namely the round ligament, tube, and ovary. So the first clamp is going to involve the cornual structures. Okay. So what do you mean by infundibulopelvic ligament? Infundibulopelvic ligament, no, it is lateral to the ovary. It starts here. You can see something called a suspensory ligament of ovary, right? So that will be the infundibulopelvic ligament, and it's going to attach to the lateral pelvic wall. Okay, so much is enough about the anatomy. And one more portion of the tube is the interstitial portion of the tube. Okay, this is that is the that portion of the tube which is nearest to the uterus is called as the interstitial portion of the tube. So two main parts of the tube is important, namely the ampulla and the isthmus. Ampulla, what happens in the ampulla? Fertilization. Fertilization happens in the ampulla, and in the isthmus, what we do is the sterilization. Okay, you're going to do puerperal sterilization. What is the technique of sterilization that we follow? Is Pomeroy's technique. Like when you go into the topic per se, you'll be told in detail about that. So one thing you just remember is in the ampullary portion of the tube, fertilization is going to take place, and in the isthmus, it is the sterilization that we are going to do for family planning. Now coming on to the ligaments of the uterus. Okay, these are the primary supports. Primary means strong supports. Okay, so this is the transverse cervical ligament. This is the cervix. This is the lateral pelvic wall. So you can see this is a fan-shaped ligament. That is a transverse cervical ligament or the McIntosh ligament, and which originates from the cervix and the upper portion of the vagina and goes to the lateral pelvic wall. And this one, what you see here, is the uterosacral ligament, which also originates from the cervix and goes to the sacrum. So this is the posterior support, primary posterior support. And this one is the pubocervical ligament. This originates from the posterior aspect of pubic symphysis, and it joins the cervix and upper portion of the vagina. So this is a lateral view. CUSC means uterosacral ligament, cardinal uterosacral ligament complex. Okay, so these two, namely the cardinal ligament and the uterosacral ligament, these two are going to form the primary supports. So you can see the cardinal ligament from the cervix to the lateral pelvic wall, and uterosacral from the posterior portion of cervix and going up to the sacrum. So sorry for this picture. This is going to show the uterosacral ligament and the round ligament. Okay. So when you come for the posting, they'll take you to lab theatre. In lab theatre, once they insert the telescope through the camera, you can see this kind of picture. So this is a posterior view because the ovary is what you are seeing first is the ovary. Okay, and one more thing is this is the sigmoid colon and this is the rectum. So this is the uterosacral. This is the uterosacral from the cervix to the sacrum, from the posterior aspect of uterus and the cervix to the sacrum. And round ligament, you know, it is originating from the anterior part of, it is one of the structures in the, it is the first structure in the corn wall, right? It is the first most structure from anterior to posterior. So you know that it's getting originated in the uterus, in the corn wall, and where is it going to get inserted? Where it'll pass through which structure and it's going to go and get inserted where? Can anyone tell? It's all your first year anatomy. Any idea? Sarat?
Ma'am,
Okay.
the round ligaments, ma'am,
Yeah, the round ligament. Where is going? It is
in
passing through.
labia,
Yeah, you can see here.
mons
What
pubis.
is this? Yeah, okay. The mons pubis is going to be the final place where it's going to get inserted. And what is this? What is this structure? This
Round
one.
ligament. Oh,
Round ligament is
the,
going through what? This is the deep
the
inguinal
deep
ring.
inguinal ring.
Okay, so it's going to go through the deep inguinal ring, inguinal canal. Then it comes out via the superficial inguinal ring, and then it goes and gets inserted into the mons pubis and labia majora. Okay, so you're clear by the with this picture, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So now coming to the major support of the uterus and the vagina, which is the pelvic diaphragm. Pelvic diaphragm or the levator ani muscles. Okay. So levator ani as such, it comprises of three muscles, namely the pubococcygeus, iliococcygeus, and ischiococcygeus, of which the pubococcygeus and the iliococcygeus alone will be included in the pelvic diaphragm. Ischiococcygeus, no, they have deleted it actually. Some books may give, but actually the ischiococcygeus is deleted. I'll tell you. So pubococcygeus, as the name suggests, no, it originates from the pubis, posterior aspect of pubis, and is getting attached to the coccyx. Okay, so it is getting attached to the coccyx, and this entire muscle is the pubococcygeus. And this area, the first opening that you see, no, this is called as hiatus urogenitalis. That is the urethra and the vagina goes through this opening, and posterior to this we know that it's going to be the rectum. Okay, this is the hiatus urogenitalis. So pubococcygeus muscle fibers are originating from the posterior aspect of pubic symphysis and getting inserted into the coccyx. The medial most fibers of the pubococcygeus is going to form the pubovaginalis. Here you can see, no, the medial most fibers of the pubococcygeus are encircling the vagina. That is going to form a sphincter around the vagina, and the muscle is called as pubovaginalis. Okay, and the medial most fibers of pubococcygeus, which is surrounding the rectum, is called as puborectalis. That is also going to form a sphincter. It's not a sphincter, it is going to it is responsible for fecal continence, and also the angulation of the rectum and the anal canal. The rectum will be somewhat angulated with the anal canal. I think you are aware of that. And a contraction of this muscle, the pubovaginalis and the puborectalis, which are the medial most fibers of pubococcygeus, is responsible for the fecal continence, and also it's going to provide support to the upper portion of the vagina. So only one muscle we have seen, that is the pubococcygeus, which has got two parts, namely pubovaginalis and the puborectalis. And this one is called as iliococcygeus. This one, you can see the fibers, no? From lateral to medial it's going. This is called as ischiococcygeus. So anyone can tell what muscle is this? This one. This is not a portion of levator ani. But what muscle is this? Any idea? This one, where my arrow is.
Obturator internus. No?
Yeah, it's obturator internus. Very good. So the fascia covering the obturator internus, no, it gets thickened. It gets thickened, and this white line, no, this white line. This is called as arcus tendinous levator ani. This one. So this white line that you're seeing is nothing but it is a thickened fascia, thickened pelvic fascia of the obturator internus, which is called as arcus tendinous levator ani. Okay, so the origin of iliococcygeus is from the arcus tendinous levator ani, and it is going to get inserted into the coccyx. Okay, any doubts? So these two are the major portion of pelvic diaphragm, that is the pubococcygeus and the iliococcygeus, which is originating in the arcus tendinous levator ani. Ischiococcygeus, which originates from the ischial spine, this portion, ischial spine, and gets inserted into the coccyx, and the lower portion of sacrum is no more included in the pelvic diaphragm. But you just verify, some books have mentioned it as getting included. I don't know what they've given in Shaw. Okay. So this one, this is obturator internus. You can see now, obturator internus, arcus tendinous levator ani, and this is the iliococcygeus originating from arcus tendinous levator ani and getting inserted here. This is ischiococcygeus. This is pubococcygeus from the posterior portion of the pubic symphysis getting inserted into the coccyx, and this is called as anococcygeal raphe. This is called as anococcygeal raphe. Okay. And the medial most fibers of pubococcygeus is this. You can see this is the pubovaginalis and this is the puborectalis. Okay. So this compresses the levator ani. So postnatally, you've heard about pelvic floor exercises and all. Kegel's exercise. Those exercises are done only to strengthen the pelvic floor, which is comprised of the levator ani muscles. And when all this pelvic floor will get weakened, any idea? When all pelvic floor will get weakened, pelvic floor weakness is one of the cause for uterovaginal prolapse. Hello? Hello? Can you hear me, ma?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So I think someone has turned on the mic. Okay. So pelvic floor, no, it gets weakened in what all conditions? Can you just? Okay, pregnancy itself, no, it's going to weaken the pelvic floor because this muscles, no, it should bear the weight of the pregnant uterus with fetus, amniotic fluid, everything. Okay. So pregnancy as such, and then other factors, multiparity, and then prolonged second stage of labor. Second stage means, you know, first stage of labor is from onset of labor pains to full dilatation of cervix. And second stage of labor is from full dilatation of cervix to the delivery of the baby. So when there is prolonged second stage, that is when the mother starts to bear down prematurely. Okay. During that time, your pelvic floor will also weaken. And multiparity I told. And then if you are doing instrumental delivery, at that time also, some fibers of levator ani may get torn. And most important cause is menopause. Menopause, almost all tissues in the body will be estrogen deprived and it will become atrophic. These are all estrogen dependent areas, the vagina, uterus, cervix, and the fascia. Everything is dependent on estrogen. So so during menopause, when there is estrogen deprivation, what will happen? This pubo-vaginalis, pubo-rectalis portion and all, this portion and all will get weakened, and you can have prolapse. The organ, the uterus, the vagina will get prolapsed through this urogenital hiatus, and sometimes the rectum also will get prolapsed. Okay. And what is the other structure that is here? Hiatus urogenitalis, I told. Uro means urethra. Urethra will pass through this hiatus urogenitalis. So when there is a weakness of this pubo-vaginalis and pubo-vaginalis and pubo-rectalis, the urethra can also prolapse, causing urethrocoele. First, the urethra comes out, and then what? The bladder comes out. That is called as cystocele. And posterior to the urethra, what you'll have? The vagina. Uterus and vagina complex you'll have. No, that can also get prolapsed. And then posteriorly, you can have rectal prolapse. And if the rectal prolapse gets severe, you will get intestines can also get prolapsed. That is called as enterocele. Okay. So these are the common questions that you're going to ask a patient coming to a gynecology OP. You'll ask for bleeding PV, discharge PV, mass descending PV, any bowel disturbances, bladder disturbances, dyspareunia, that is difficult, that is patients having any pain during coitus, abdominal distension, mass abdomen, features of severe anemia, fatigability, difficulty in breathing, tiredness. All the features of anemia you'll ask when she's having severe bleeding PV. Okay. And sometimes patient may present with infertility. Some may present with pressure symptoms. This is mainly in fibroid and ovarian mass. If the fibroid is going to be too big, anteriorly it's going to compress on the bladder and it is going to cause urinary symptoms. Posteriorly, it may compress the rectum and it may cause bowel symptoms. What kind of bowel symptoms? It's going to be constipation. Anteriorly, if it compresses, it's going to be frequent urination. The bladder capacity itself will be very much reduced. Patient may have a frequent filling of bladder and she may frequently void. Sometimes it may even press the urethra. Very big fibroids may cause pressure effect on the urethra, and patient may present with urinary retention also. Okay, this if you suspect the symptoms of cachexia, loss of appetite, loss of weight, this and all, no symptoms of cachexia, you will ask only if you suspect that it is a cancer, like cervical cancer, endometrial cancer, vaginal cancer, ovarian CA, and feminizing or virilizing symptoms. Feminizing symptom in a female, what it will lead to? Precocious puberty. And virilizing symptoms. Virilizing symptoms means masculinizing symptoms. Like she'll tell that her voice has changed. She's having hoarseness of voice. There is her build of the body has changed, and there is hair grown all over the body. So these feminizing or masculinizing symptoms, this is seen in feminizing ovarian tumor and masculinizing ovarian tumor. Symptoms of cachexia I already told in when you suspect CA. CA means cancers. Infertility, and anemia. So, okay. So we'll go into detail of each and every complaint that you see here only when you go to the topic per se. Like someone will be taking you about abnormal uterine bleeding, and that will be covering the bleeding PV part. Okay, so menstrual history is very important in both obstetrics and gynecology. Now coming to disorders of menstruation, these are a few terms. Everything is in your book. You just listen. That's all. Okay. When a female gets her first menstruation, that is called as menarche. Okay. When menstruation stops in a female, that is called as menopause. When there is absence of menstruation, it is called as amenorrhea. Amenorrhea. Okay. And oligomenorrhea. And can anyone tell me what is the normal duration of menstruation in a female? Normal duration.
20.
Some will have 28-day cycle. Okay, so you give me a range, like from 28 to 40 days, something like this, which is considered as normal. Can you tell? Normally, you can tell that a cycle is normal when her periods comes either from 21st day to 35 days. She can have periods every 21 days up to 35 days. So from 25 to 35 days is considered as normal. Okay, normal. It is considered as the patient is having regular cycles. Okay, so whenever the menstruation occurs at intervals more than 35 days, but it is regular, that is called as oligomenorrhea. Whenever the menstruation occurs regularly, less than 25 days, 21 days. So you two numbers you have to remember, that is 21 and 35. So less than 21 days, she's getting cycles frequently, but in a constant interval. Maybe it is 18 days, maybe it is 20 days, but 20 days once she's getting her cycles frequently. That is called as polymenorrhea. And if she's getting cycles more than 35 days, that's called as oligomenorrhea. Okay, in these two, patient will have regular cycles. Okay, metrorrhagia means irregular. This is the see, oligomenorrhea and polymenorrhea both are regular cycles. This is more than 35 days. This is less than 21 days. Metrorrhagia is irregular intervals. Menstrual bleeding occurs at irregular intervals, so bleeding occurs between menstrual cycles. She'll get her periods, and in 10 days she'll get her periods again, and in 5 days she'll start bleeding again. That is called as metrorrhagia. That is, bleeding occurs at irregular intervals of bleeding between menstrual cycles, called as metrorrhagia. Okay, menorrhagia. So irregular cycles. Now we have seen only metrorrhagia till now. Menorrhagia means that is also regular cycles. She'll have regular cycles, but the flow will be more, or it will be lasting for more than 7 days. Okay, she'll have more flow. How can you confirm that she's having more flow? You can ask how many pads she's changing per day, whether it's associated with clots. Okay, so she'll have regular cycles, but there is more flow, or it is going to last for more duration, which is more than 7 days. So that is called as menorrhagia. So oligomenorrhea, she'll have regular cycles. Polymenorrhea, she'll have regular cycles. Menorrhagia, she'll have regular cycles. Metrorrhagia means it is irregular cycles, irregular intervals. So menorrhagia means it is more flow. So just combine both these things. Menstrual bleeding occurring at irregular intervals with excessive flow or duration, that is called as menorrhagia. Okay. Any doubts, ma? Till here? Any doubts?
Ma'am, intermenstrual bleeding is irregular or regular?
Intermenstrual, see, it is irregular. See, only one point you should remember. Oligomenorrhea, polymenorrhea, menorrhagia. These three, it is regular cycles. Oligo means it is going to be for more than 5 days, at intervals of more than 35 days, sorry. Poly means it's going to be regular, but the interval is going to be less than 21 days. Menorrhagia is also going to be regular, but the flow or duration is going to be more. Metrorrhagia is the intramenstrual bleeding that you're telling about. It is irregular. Okay. Either you'll get bleeding between menstrual cycles, okay, or
Yes,
when
ma'am.
bleeding occurs at irregular intervals. Both are the same only.
Okay.
So metrorrhagia and menometrorrhagia, these both are irregular cycles. Oligopoly and menorrhagia. இதெல்லாம் வந்து these are occurring at regular cycles. What do you mean by hypomenorrhea? Hypomenorrhea, it's not here. Anyone? Hypomenorrhea. Decreased flow. Here in see, when the flow is increased, it's called as menorrhagia. No, when she's changing only one pad per day, half pad per day, or she's telling her flows very much scanty, but her periods are regular. But she's changing only her periods last for only one day, and she changes only one pad on that day alone. But her cycles are regular. That you'll call it as hypomenorrhea. Okay. Now coming to amenorrhea. Amenorrhea means no menstruation. There are two types of amenorrhea, primary and secondary. Okay. Primary amenorrhea means she has not attained menarche. She has not at all attained age attained panel. Okay, she has not at all attained menarche. It's defined as absence of menses at the age of 16 in the presence of normal secondary sexual characters, and by the age of 14 in the absence of secondary sexual characters. Now, as of now, you just remember that primary amenorrhea is just absence of menses. Two numbers you have to remember in this, 16 and 14. That you just go through later. So secondary amenorrhea means absence of menses for 3 months in a woman who is previously normally menstruating, or for 9 months in a woman with previous oligomenorrhea. Any doubts in this? Secondary amenorrhea means the patient will be having previous regular cycles, and for the first time she'll have 3 months amenorrhea. Absence of menses for 3 months in a woman with previous normal menstruation. So she'll be having regular cycles and 3 months amenorrhea. That is also called as secondary amenorrhea. Or previously, if she was having oligomenorrhea, that is more than 35 days cycle, she's having, and if she's having absence of menses for 9 months, it's called as secondary amenorrhea. Okay. And this term, what do you mean by dysmenorrhea? Dysmenorrhea is painful menstruation. Dysmenorrhea means painful menstruation, and is the most common gynecological complaint in young women. So dysmenorrhea can be divided into two, namely primary and the secondary. Primary is also called as spasmodic, and secondary is also called as congestive dysmenorrhea. Primary dysmenorrhea, it is not associated with pelvic pathology. So without any pelvic pathology, patient will have dysmenorrhea. That is called as primary dysmenorrhea, and it is purely functional. Okay, the pain is caused because of prostaglandin secretion, which is associated with endometrial shedding. So that's why you take meftal-spas, which is going to decrease prostaglandins in the uterus, and you are going to be relieved of pain. Okay. Primary dysmenorrhea means it is not associated with obvious pelvic pathology. Secondary dysmenorrhea means it is associated with pelvic pathology. It means the pain is because of some pathology in the uterus, which may be a fibroid or adenomyosis or an endometriosis or an intrauterine polyp, anything. Okay, some pathology or just pelvic inflammatory disease. So some pathology is there, and you call it as secondary dysmenorrhea. Okay, so much only I covered in gynec. Now we'll move on to obstetrics. Okay, now first we'll see what is lie, presentation, and position. Okay, what is lie, presentation, and position? It's very important. Please listen. So lie. So I'm telling that this and this is longitudinal lie and this is transverse lie. Okay, so what do you mean by lie? Lie means it is the relationship between the long axis of the fetus and the long axis of the uterus or the maternal spine. Or you just remember as the relationship between the long axis of the fetus and the long axis of the maternal spine. So in this, the long axis of the fetus is going to be this, and the long axis of the maternal spine is also going to be vertical. So this lie is called as longitudinal lie. So this is a cephalic presentation, that is a lower pole of the uterus is occupied by the head of the fetus. This is a cephalic presentation and the lie is longitudinal. Okay, so this one, come to this one. This is a breech presentation. The lower pole of the uterus is occupied by the breech of the baby. And what is the lie? The long axis of the fetus and the long axis of the uterus are the same, right? The long axis of fetus is also straight and the long axis of the uterus is also vertical. Sorry, maternal spine is also going to be vertical. So this lie and this lie are longitudinal lie. And what about this? This is the long axis of the fetus is going to be transverse like this. And the long axis of the maternal spine is going to be like this. So this lie is called as transverse lie. Okay? Can you understand? Any doubts? Any doubts? Okay. Now the lie of the fetus refers to the long axis of the fetus in relation to the long axis of the mother, or that is the spine of the mother. So longitudinal lie is normal. Okay. So when the long axis of the fetus is like this, it's called as longitudinal. When the long axis of the fetus is like this, it is called as transverse, and it can be oblique also. Transverse lie and oblique lie are abnormal. Longitudinal lie is normal. So here you can see this is, so both cephalic presentation and breech presentation both are longitudinal lie, but the presenting part is different. Here the head will be the presenting part, here the breech will be the presenting part. 1 minute. என்னப்பா என்ன அது கிளாஸ் எடுத்துட்டு இருக்கேன். என்ன பேஷண்ட் யாராவது இருக்காங்களா? 8 o'clock வர சொல்லு. 8 o'clock எத்தனை பேருன்னு சொல்லிட்டு எனக்கு கால் பண்ணு. Hello. This is, so in both cephalic and breech, the lie is longitudinal. Okay. In cephalic, so the longitudinal lie is seen in 99%. 99% of the babies will be in longitudinal lie, but among that 95% will be cephalic, only 4% will be breech. Okay, and oblique lie and transverse lie constitutes only 1%. Understood lie? Any doubts in lie, ma?
No, ma'am.
Okay. So now going to the going to the presentation. Presentation is that part of the fetus that is occupying the lower pole of the uterus. Okay. So this is a cephalic presentation. The head is occupying the lower pole of uterus. It's called as cephalic. And when the butt of the uterus is occupying, when the butt of the fetus is occupying the lower pole, it is called as breech presentation. So presentation is understanding this is easy only. But what mistake that children usually make is in lie only. Now position. The position of the fetus is described by the relationship of the presenting part to the maternal pelvis. Okay. So before going into the position, you should know what is the denominator. Denominator of the presenting part. See, this presentation means one is cephalic, this is breech. Okay. There is something called as denominator of the presenting part. In cephalic presentation, the denominator will be the occiput. Denominator is the most it is a prominent bony point on the presentation, which is used to describe the position. So only if you know the denominator of one particular presentation, you will be telling about the position. Okay, so for cephalic presentation, the denominator is the occiput, and for breech presentation, the denominator will be sacrum. Just understand this, and now we'll see examples. Then you'll understand better. So position is the relationship of the presenting part to the maternal pelvis. Okay. So consider that this is a cephalic presentation. Cephalic presentation, and you know that the denominator in cephalic presentation is the fetal occiput. Okay, so when the fetal occiput lies here, it is called as direct occipito-anterior. When this is the left side and this is the right side. Okay, when the fetal occiput occupies here, it is called as left occipito-anterior, left occipito-lateral, left occipito-posterior, direct occipito-posterior, right occipito-posterior, right occipito-lateral, right occipito-anterior. So this position is determined by the denominator being occiput for the cephalic presentation. Suppose if it is a breech presentation, this denominator will be the sacrum. So you will call it as direct sacro-anterior, left sacro-anterior, left sacro-lateral, left sacro-posterior, and so on and so forth. Understood till now? Understood, Ma?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, now you will be telling. Napa, solla? Okay. Okay, now you should tell what this is. What position is this? Where is the occiput? The occiput is here and it is anterior. So this is what? Can anyone tell? This
Direct anterior.
Yeah, direct occipito-anterior. Okay. Understood? So this one, okay, this one, the occiput is in lateral position. And this is the left side of the mother. This is, can anyone tell? Left
Occipito anterior.
anterior. Okay, good. So this one is, this is mother's right, and this is the occiput.
Right occipito-anterior.
Okay. Okay. Right occipito-anterior, left occipito-anterior. This one, you tell me. This is the face of the baby. So occiput will be posterior. So this is direct occipito-posterior. This is mother's right. This is left, and occiput is on the left side and posterior. So what you will call this? Left occipito
posterior.
Posterior. Very good. This one?
Right occipito
posterior. Okay. So same thing with sacrum. This is what? First picture.
Direct sacro-anterior.
Okay, very good, very good. This one?
Left sacro.
Anterior.
Yes.
Right, good. This one? This one?
Right sacro anterior.
Yes, very good. So same thing, you will get what? Direct sacro, posterior, sacrolateral, all positions will be there. So the idea is you have to understand what the position means. So this is the denominator in breech presentation, and occiput is a denominator in cephalic presentation. Now coming to obstetric code. And many of you will make mistake during examination in obstetric code. Okay, very, very easy it is. Only one thing you have to remember, gravida means both present and the previous pregnancy. That's all. Gravida means both present and the previous pregnancy. That is, you have to include the present pregnant condition of the patient also and the previous pregnancies you have to include, irrespective of the fate of pregnancy. It can get terminated as an abortion, or it could have been an ectopic pregnancy, or it would have been a IUD baby. She would have expelled in 4 months. Okay, or she would have delivered a healthy baby also. Okay, but gravida means it should include the present and the previous pregnancies. All others, it's going to include only the previous pregnancies. Okay, para means previous pregnancies that has crossed 28 weeks, irrespective of whether the baby is alive or dead. So she would have had a delivery at 8 months amenorrhea previously, but the baby would have died after 1 day. Okay, so that pregnancy you have to count. That's what I'm telling. You have to consider. See, para, live, and abortion. You have all in all these three. No, you have to. It denotes only the previous pregnancies. Gravida means it includes both the present and the previous. I'll give you examples. Okay, first example. 24-year-old patient who is 5 months amenorrhea, who has previous history of spontaneous abortion and 45 days amenorrhea, has come for anomaly scan. What is her obstetric code? Tell me.
G1
Anyone?
P0 L0 A0.
G1, P0,
P0
L0,
L0 A0.
yeah, A0.
Okay, A1. Okay.
A1. So, gravida 2, abortion 1. It means P is 0 and L is 0. Okay? Understood?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Now, the second patient, someone else answer. Okay? 40-year-old elderly with previous 3 normal deliveries, all female children, has come with 3 months amenorrhea for MTP. MTP is medical termination of pregnancy. She has 3. Tell me.
G4, P3, L3, A0.
Okay, very good, super. Understood now? You're understanding, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So she's having 3 children at home, and all 3 are female children who are alive. Now she has come with the 4th pregnancy, means. So this pregnancy also you have to include. So it is gravida 4 and para and all. It is para 3 and live 3. This one, 28-year-old with previous history. This one you think can answer, okay? 28-year-old with previous history of twin delivery 5 years back. Both twins alive and healthy, has come with complaints of bleeding PV since morning. UPT done outside is positive and she gives 2 months amenorrhea, history of 2 months amenorrhea. Think and answer.
G2 P1 L2 A0.
Yes, very good. See, what many of you will do is, you'll see it's a twin delivery and it's going to be both 2 babies crossing 28 weeks now. So, they'll tell P2 L2. That is wrong. Okay. Though 2 babies are inside, it's going to be only 1 pregnancy that has crossed 28 weeks. So this one will be gravida 2, para 1, live 2. Any doubts? Others, any doubts, ma?
Hello, ma'am. Hello, ma'am.
Sollu.
Ma'am, the first question, why G is not 2, ma'am? G.
G2 தான்.
2 then. Oh, 1 from
G2 A1.
Oh, okay. Okay, ma'am. Thank you.
gravida 2 abortion 1, இது gravida 4 para 3 live 3, இது வந்து gravida 2 para 1 live 2. ஓகேயா?
Okay, ma'am.
Okay. சரி. Obstetric patients, what all you'll ask, whether she's able to perceive fetal movements, whether she's having any bleeding PV, she's having any draining PV, pain abdomen, pedal edema, difficulty in breathing, discharge PV, backache, and if she is a case of gestational hypertension, you'll ask of signs and symptoms of severe preeclampsia. Okay, that and all, when you go into the topic per se, you'll understand what it is. Now you just remember, when a female is coming for her regular checkup, first thing that you will ask is whether she's able to perceive fetal movements well. Then these other things and all, bleeding PV, draining PV, pain abdomen, this is all very common. Pedal edema, you know that most pregnant patients will have pedal edema, difficulty in breathing, discharge PV, and backache. And coming to, I'm not going into the details of obstetric examination, only the relevant things that many people find it difficult, no? Only those topics I'm just taking. And next time we'll cover everything in detail. Obstetric examination. So what all you'll see, the fundal height, symphysia fundal height, fundal grip, lateral pelvic grip, first pelvic grip, and second pelvic grip. The first four are very easy. First four is very easy. Fundal height now this lady is measuring the symphysia fundal height. But before that, you have to measure the fundal height. How you will measure the fundal height is, you'll stand to the right of the patient with the ulnar border of your left hand. With the ulnar border of your left hand, you will start palpating from the xiphisternum and you will feel the first point of resistance. That is called as the fundal height. So you will start palpating with the ulnar border of your left hand from the xiphisternum. Slowly you will just palpate, and if the first resistance is felt here in this area, then it corresponds to 28 weeks. Okay, so you will tell us fundal height corresponds to 28 weeks, and with a pen you will mark that area, and after that with the inch tape now you will measure the symphysia fundal height. So you will keep this inch tape in such a way that the centimeters is facing down. Okay, centimeter should face down, and from the symphysis to the fundal height that you have marked, that you will measure, and that corresponds to the symphysia fundal height. It gives a rough estimation of the gestational age of the patient. Okay, so fundal height, if it corresponds to 28 weeks, the symphysia fundal height will also be 28 centimeters. Okay, from 14 weeks till 32 weeks, the symphysia fundal height will correspond to the fundal height in centimeters. So if the fundal height that you're measuring is, that you with the ulnar border of the hand, if you feel that it is 36, the symphysia fundal height will also be 36 centimeters. Okay, this is from 14 weeks till 32 weeks. Some books mention even 34 weeks. So this is easy. This you can easily do, fundal height and symphysia fundal height. Okay, and then what you're going to do is, this is the fundal grip. So fundal grip, by doing this fundal grip, what are you going to find? It is a fetal pole. So upper pole of the uterus contains what part, and the lower portion of the uterus contains what part of the fetus. So fundal grip is going to tell about the fetal poles. So both hands are placed over the fundus, and the content of the fundus is determined. A hard, smooth, round pole indicates fetal head in the fundus. So the fetal head is in the fundus, then it's going to be breech presentation. A soft pole continuous with the fetal body is the fetal buttock. So if it is going, if what you feel in the fundus is going to be a soft, broad mass, it's going to be the breech. This is a head is how they are describing each is also important. Hard, round. நம்மளோட புக்ல வந்து hard, smooth, hard, independently palatable mass such as your fetal head அப்படின்னா கொடுத்துருப்பாங்க தத்தால. Okay, so fundal grip is for fetal pole. Which pole of the fetus, which part of the fetus is occupying the fundus? That alone you understand. Now this is the lateral grip. Okay, so with the palmar aspect, in all these things you're standing on the right of the patient. See, in symphysis fundal height, you're standing on the right of the patient. In fundal grip, you're standing on the right of the patient. And you're facing the patient. Okay, and this is the lateral grip. It's also called a umbilical grip. Here also you're standing on the right of the patient. So you're palpating on the right side slowly, and the left side also you're palpating slowly. So if you feel a uniform curved resistance on one side, then it is a spine on that side, and this one, if this is a spine, you will feel as uniform curved resistance. So spine on one side means irregular soft knob-like structures will be felt on the other side. So in other words, you can determine the lie. Okay, and where the spine of the baby is felt. If the spine of the baby is felt along this curvature, it means the spine is it's along the longitudinal axis of the maternal spine, and it corresponds to a longitudinal line. Okay. Any doubts in this lateral pelvic grip or umbilical grip? See, before doing any of these procedures, you will get the consent of the patient. Consent of the patient first, that I'm examining you. Will you permit me? You have to ask her, okay? And you should ask her to empty her bladder, urinary bladder, and then to lie in supine position with her knees flexed. Flexion of knees, not completely flexed, semi-flexed. Flexion of knees will relax abdominal muscles. So you have to get the consent of the patient. Ask the patient to empty her bladder, lie in supine position with her knees semi-flexed. After this only, you should proceed to obstetric examination. Fundal height, symphysis fundal height, fundal grip, lateral pelvic grip. Till this we have seen. Okay. And then this is the Pollix grip. You have two more grips. Okay. This is the Pollix grip. It's going to tell you about the presenting part. So this position, you have seen many of us doing this thing. The thumb and the middle finger of the right hand. It's not just the middle finger, the other four fingers. The thumb on one side and the other four fingers on the other side. Okay. The thumb and the middle fingers of the right hand are placed just above the suprapubic area to determine the presenting part. So if it is a head, you can feel it as a hard, palatable, smooth mass occupying the lower pole of the uterus. And if it is a breech, it's going to be a broad, soft mass occupying the lower pole. The way you describe both things, the head and the breech, you have to see what they have given in the book. So main thing is Pollix grip, or the first pelvic grip is you're determining which part of the fetus is occupying the lower pole. That is the presenting part. Okay. Cephalic or the breech presentation distinguished from each other. You can understand that. So this is the Pollix grip or the first pelvic grip. See the hands, the fingers, how it is placed. So this one also, you're standing on the right of the patient and you're facing the patient. So we have seen fundal height, symphysis fundal height, fundal grip, lateral pelvic grip, and first pelvic grip. In all these 5 things, no, you're standing on the right side of the patient, you're facing the patient, and you're doing. Only in one grip, you'll stand on the right side of the patient and you'll face the foot of the patient. That is the second pelvic grip. That is the second pelvic grip. Okay. It is a bit deeper grip. You have to start, you don't read these things. Just look at this picture. You have to start palpating from the fundus of the uterus with both the right hand palmar aspect and the left hand palmar aspect slowly. Okay. The first prominence that you feel, no, you're going to mark that on the right side, and this first prominence on the left side that you're going to feel, no, that also you're going to mark. Come to the lower picture. Suppose the baby is like this. If it's in the face presentation and you're palpating with this hand, the first prominence that you're going to feel is will be the occiput on this side, right? And on this side, the first prominence that you're going to feel will be the mentum. So it will determine. And then you see that the occiput is at a higher level when compared to the mentum. Mentum is the chin, and that means the baby's head is deflexed or completely extended. Okay. So in a normal cephalic presentation, so now consider, you compare this picture and this picture. So you're starting to palpate from the fundus lower down. The first prominence that you feel here will be the occiput, and on that side, the first prominence that you feel will be the sinciput. Sinciput is the forehead. Okay. So normally in a well-flexed fetus, the occiput will be at a lower level than the sinciput. It means the attitude is well flexed. The fetal head is well flexed. Understood? Can everyone? Sollu.
How can we differentiate occiput and sinciput?
See, first with the lateral pelvic grip, you're palpating. You're coming to know on which side the back of the fetus is. That is the spine of the fetus. Okay.
Yes,
you can understand. So from the lateral grip, no, this grip. In this grip itself, you'll find out where the spine is. The spine may be here or here. So, and with the in this grip itself, you'll get an idea about the location of spine. Okay, and then you'll come to this one. So, suppose in the lateral grip, the spine is on this side. You have located the spine is on this side. So the first prominence that you feel will be the on the spine side. What will be the first prominence that you feel? It will be the occiput, right?
Occiput, yes.
So on the limb side, the first prominence that you feel will be the sinciput. It may be the sinciput, or in this case, what it is a completely deflexed head or an extended head. So it will be the chin. You can understand,
Yes, sir.
So you will determine the attitude of the fetal head in the second pelvic rib. It's also called as deep. Don't use this term deep pelvic rib. You don't use. You use it as a second pelvic rib. It determines about the attitude of the fetal head. Okay, whether the fetus is well flexed or deflexed or the head is extended. You'll palpate the occiput and sinciput, and based on the relationship between the occiput and sinciput, you'll come to a conclusion whether it is a fully flexed head or a deflexed head. Understood?
Ma'am, one doubt. Ma'am, if the position of the baby is in obliques, then how will we be able to correctly pinpoint, ma'am?
This is not for oblique and all. This is only for the longitudinal light. In oblique, you will not see all these things. No, we are not concerned about all these things in an oblique or a transverse lie, because they'll go for section only. Okay, transverse lie and oblique lie are indications for cesarean section, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, now why you are determining all these things in a longitudinal lie is to find whether she can be left for a normal delivery. See, when this is going to be the case, when it's already fully extended now, when it's going to be a face presentation or bro presentation, you're not going to allow her for a normal delivery. Okay. When it is the other three cases, no, you can allow her for a normal delivery, keeping in mind that when she gets good uterine contraction, the head flexes. Okay. When the baby will mold and the head will, and the flexion of the head will increase with contractions. You know that, na? When the uterus is going to contract, this head that is, see, this is a completely flexed head. This has extended lightly. This has extended partial extension. This is completely extended head. These first three pictures, no, these babies, the head can flex in response to good uterine contractions.
Okay.
Okay. So this one you're not going to allow for a normal. These three you can allow. Okay.
Okay, ma'am. So for the identifying the last condition alone, we are doing this pelvic grip so that we can.
Now to identify a deflexed head also. Deflexed head, not all the time a deflexed head will flex. Okay, sometimes it will just remain like this.
Okay.
Okay. Even with good uterine contraction, it will keep remaining like this. Okay. So if it is a deflexed head, no, you have to be a bit cautious. That's what is a take-home point.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you.
Okay. 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 Thank you. You can.
Thank you.
So I think I've covered some basics. I'm not able to cover everything. You can arrange for some other class. You can tell some topic. I'll take on that also. Okay. You understood what all I spoke today.
Sure, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, this is almost like a introductory class. So officially classes will be starting after the schedule will be released. Still we can see at the last few names where roll number is not indicated. Vishnu, Vicky, Star Rose. So we prefer roll number. Just as you can see, if you have given your roll number in the front, it will be arranged in the order. So it will be easy to find absentees also. If you are not giving the number in the front, maybe you will enter into the absentees list. Okay. The recorded video will be circulated very soon. Thank you so much.